pleasure to introduce our final plenary speaker, Associate Professor Clarence Green from the University of Hong Kong. So Dr. Green's research spans vocabulary, reading, L1 and L2 acquisition, language psychology, and disciplinary literacy. So a former K-12 teacher, he co-chairs the Australian Linguistics Society's Linguistics in the Schools SIG, serves as associate editor of the Asian Pacific Journal of Education, and sits on editorial boards for Journal of English for Academic Purposes and Australian Journal of Linguistics. So he is the 2025 recipient of the UKLA Wiley Research in Literacy Education Award. Today, he addresses how we can strengthen the evidence base for SFL and genre theory in K-12 literacy through more rigorous, scalable research designs and collaborations. So please, everyone, welcome Associate Professor Clarence Green. So Clarence, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Professor Eric. I appreciate that. And thanks for the invitation. I'm excited to talk to colleagues today at this conference. I'll just downgrade my status there to assistant professor, but fingers crossed. Here's hoping associate, right? Okay, so like Professor Eric said, I think I'll just talk to you today about areas in which there might be opportunities to strengthen systemic functional linguistics, genre theory, at least when it's applied in the K-12 space for pedagogical purposes. I mean, the conference has shown it's a very rich, linguistic theory, and it does so much. And I'm just going to focus here on the kind of pedagogical manifestations of it. So also a special thanks to the people I've worked with on a lot of the information I'll present to you this afternoon. Dr. Ian Giblin in particular at Macquarie, Dr. Jean Moder at the University of Melbourne. So, they have contributed to what I'm sharing today. I think probably by the end of the conference, I don't need to go through this too much, right? So SFL, School of Linguistics, and I think we all know, what the main tenets of this framework are. So maybe I'll just start in the middle here. It's really unique. I think we'd all agree. It's really unique amongst linguistic theories in terms of its uptake in K-12 all around the world. Certainly Australia. The UK also, and it's had an impact in the US and Canada too, maybe to a lesser extent, but no other linguistic theory has ever done that. So that's pretty impressive, right? Getting into that K-12 space. Now, when it's promoted as having teacher applications, there's again, this research is rich. I can't really do it justice here. And the other people in the room probably can do that a lot better than I can. But it emphasizes some really interesting things like explicit teaching, direct instruction, which is quite good. Focuses on things like the function of grammar, particularly within a text, usually within text. Generic features of texts, the genre sets, recounts, inquiry reports, these kinds of things, and teaching SFL meta language to a certain extent. Not everybody needs to, needs to be trained to be a holiday and understand it all, but enough meta language to provide the children in the class a toolkit of choices. This is the kind of language we find when it's applied in K-12 instruction. So, again, unlike any other linguistic theory, I think in history, it's become closely connected with literacy education, and Australia, led the way. Perhaps not surprisingly, given the geographic, kind of origins of SFL and GT, right? But in K-12, it led the way. It's the basis, or it was and still influences the language strand of the Australian curriculum, primarily Hallidaean, as Deb Myhill characterizes it. Impact for decades, right? From when I was a teacher years ago, it was, you know, hugely impactful there, and it still is. So 30 odd years, at least, you know, maybe more, 40 by now, of real impact on curriculum policy in the UK. Also very widespread, impacted, you know, historically. I guess we don't need to go through all of this. You get the idea. It's really, you know, really gotten into that space of K-12 and done a lot of, you know, had a lot of influence, right? And you'll find it in ITE, initial teacher training programs all around the world, particularly in Australian education departments. That tends to be the linguistic model that is chosen to train teachers. You know, so yeah, that's quite interesting. You'll have universities that have their linguistics departments, and then education departments, and you know, the linguistics in that the teachers get trained in or introduced in, it typically is SFL. So very, very successful, amazing. And you know, so besides ITE kind of dominance, you see it in a lot of textbooks, a lot of commercial products for sale, professional development also for sale to teachers. Um, Again, I probably don't need to tell the audience this, do I? So, you know, at the core of SFL is a rich meta language. I think that's pretty well already, you know, very well known by the experts in this room. Yeah, okay. So I think I can skip this slide just to the kind of points in the box here, because this is what I want to share and think through with you, talk through with you. So it's argued in K-12, when we apply this framework to K-12, that there are benefits of SFL, or SFL GT can be translated into a classroom pedagogy, and teaching explicit features, some of the things we talked about before, functions of language in a genre, that kind of thing will raise literacy outcomes. It will help children read and write better, and there's a lot of conceptual, you know, work that's been done arguing that, you know, because grammar's treated as a semiotic system, access to meaning, we show them how to make meaning, we do it in context, and certainly that makes a lot of sense. Right. But you know, just because something makes sense doesn't mean we know that it actually does what one proposes or hopes that it does. Uh, yeah, and then there's also the teacher training, and as I said, it's in teacher education departments, you know, in many universities around the world, and particularly uh, Australia. And then the argument here is something like the teachers benefit from learning a model of language, in particular the SFL framework, knowledge about language, which you know, does have knock-on effects to their ability to teach. That's out there in the research, not just with SFL. So yeah, these are kind of some ideas that we wanted to, you know, investigate, or just unpack, right? Because this discourse is it's so influential, and it's so accepted out there, that we just wanted to, you know, as academics, right? We're disinterested researchers, one would hope. We just want to, you know, take a look at, you know, the evidence for this. So, okay, I think I've said this enough times, right? Teachers have been using the functional approach to language for the past couple of decades. So definitely is in the classroom. I'll highlight here just two kind of, I mean, it's it's a broad, you know, it's a broad thing, isn't it? It's a broad framework, and it's been operationalized in different ways in the space that I'm talking about. And I more beyond here, so I'll just focus on two. The Exeter pedagogy is great. This is Deb Myhill, former head of the current head of the former, she resigned recently, of the UKLA, United Kingdom Literacy Association. So she developed this fantastic thing called the Exeter pedagogy as nomenclature. it's based on SFL genre theory, and it involves the things we talked about: explicit teaching of meta language, grammar, genre features. Students learn the notion of grammar and choice, grammar as choice, and the claim is, that this will, as I said, improve student writing outcomes. In particular, Deborah Mael is particularly interested in writing outcomes. Yeah, and the linking hypothesis, as we call it, the mechanism behind that is, because students will understand the crucial relationship between choice, grammatical choice, and their meaning making potential in text. So that's that's the pedagogy, and it's got a good theoretical rationale. Reading to learn. This is developed by David Rose in Australia. Similar things, also based on SFL, explicit teaching, deconstruct a mentor text, teachers' language for completing particular tasks, like teaching reading in a class. You redefine that. You help them, learn SFL language. For instance, you train them in, identifying noun groups, meaning, how meaning is expressed in paragraphs of writing, sentences, these kind of things. And this is not just about writing. This is improving reading comprehension and consequently students' writing. So it's a kind of reading to learn, right? I guess that's how it connects to the title. So just a couple of examples here. And if you read through the literature, there's many other ways that teachers can look in textbooks and say, oh, okay, I can do this. This is an activity within the systemic functional linguistics or genre theory language framework that's been recommended to me to build their grammatical knowledge, build their meaning making potential, these kind of things. Okay. All right, so that's the background. What I'd like to kind of pivot to now is a trend you've probably all noticed around the world the past 10 years, although it's been going on longer than that. And this is the kind of evidence-based movement, evidence-based reform that's really impacting policy. Yeah, those of you, if you're in the UK, would have seen, this a few years ago with the, looking through the meta-analyses, Nick Gibbs' work, phonics and phonics checks and this kind of thing, science of reading, science of learning, huge discussions in the States. Canada also, last week, Manitoba, Right to Read report. Australia, massive policy changes there as well recently within the past year and the past 6 months. Now, all right, what is this evidence-based reform? A part of it is fundamental research. So if we're talking about things like the science of reading and the science of learning, some of it's coming from things like, well, we have a better understanding of how children read from neurology, for instance, cognitive science work. So we can see that, for instance, they process words in particular ways, and that could potentially suggest certain ways to teach children to read, for the phonological recoding, phonics, this kind of thing, based on these fundamental science things. So that's important. But not really enough, as Shanahan, says, because I mean the rubber hits the road in the classroom, and so for all your great, neuroimaging studies or models, computer models and things like that, in the end you have to take that science and translate it into the classroom and see if it actually raises students' literacy outcomes, reading outcomes, what have you, in a measurable way. And that's kind of at least my articulation of this evidence-based reform that is really picking up speed and traveling around the world. So the idea, what works best in education is answered in this framework, in this paradigm, by measurable results derived from classroom interventions, right? So you have to measure reading, writing, literacy outcomes. There has to be some kind of control group, another class, right? And you have to say, okay, my pedagogy worked better than the pedagogy than the class that didn't get the pedagogy. Yeah, really, that's it. Quasi-experimental, experimental research designs. Uh, okay, so all right, I mean, researchers were familiar with these kind of designs, I'm sure. They have been taken up by not government bodies, but maybe bodies funded by governments and a lot of independent organizations. So there are protocols which came from us in academia, right? Not me personally, but we developed them, and they went out there in the world, and these things you're probably familiar with them. What Works Clearinghouse, in the U.S. is a huge aggregator of research and looks at intervention studies, rates them. What is the evidence we can share with teachers about this particular pedagogy, not just literacy, like everyone, there's thousands of them, right? Like, pedagogy in math, pedagogy, in whatever, digital learning, right? So there's thousands of them. And that's one of their primary jobs, to say, what is the evidence for this pedagogy that helps a student learn better, achieve better outcomes. And the similar things, education and endowment, the EEF in the UK, same thing. Slightly kind of different evaluation protocols, but still against controls, interventions against controls, and ones in Australia too. There's a couple of them. Arrow, which I believe is changing. I think there's some policy shifting around that. Center for Education and Statistics, I think that's a New South Wales one there, but they all follow the same, the same kind of methods that I'm sharing here, right? And they have these things called evidence hierarchies, gold standard. Maybe it's not a great name, but the gold standard for if your pedagogy that you're proposing helps kids read and write or does whatever is an RCT, a randomized control trial. It doesn't have to be massive. It doesn't have to be randomizing children to classes. Of course, that's impossible. It could be like just randomizing your classes to intervention, non-intervention, or schools. Like, it can be done at different levels, right? Or cluster RCTs, right? Or meta-analyses of these also matter. So if you get enough of these kind of studies, then you're like, oh wow, this pedagogy probably will work. And we say probably because classrooms are different, right? Students are different, but probably if we've got some solid RCTs showing reading gains, for instance, or writing gains, then that's good information to communicate to teachers that let's take a shot and roll that out. Doesn't mean it will work in every classroom. Silver standard, the same thing except quasi-experimental, right? Or RCTs that might have a few problems like attrition that can bring in validity problems in your measurement of did only the high achieving students stay in or something like that. Okay, so in other words, I think all of this is based, on the idea that what we need are pools of classroom intervention studies with measured outcomes against controls. And if we have this kind of data, we can tell teachers that a pedagogy has been shown to raise literacy outcomes with a bit more force, right? With a bit more confidence. Okay, so that's and I don't get me wrong, this is not accepted by everybody. I mean, there are people in the room, perhaps, reasonably so, saying, well, we don't agree with any of this. And then, so there's controversy around this, but this is what it is. These are just the facts out there. Yeah, okay. And part of this is systematic reviews too. So, you've probably seen the rise of systematic reviews in academia the past few years, maybe the past decade. They're very useful because over the years we get these intervention studies, and so we need to synthesize the evidence. It's one way of saying, well, there's variability across classes, across schools, across studies. can we look at them all at once and then see if this, this pedagogy or similar pedagogies, actually, have a good chance of raising literacy outcomes. The two main ones are meta-analyses, and that's a purely statistical one. If you know the fantastic work by John Hattie, that's all meta-analysis based on effect size. The other one is very good, similar to meta-analyses, but you've got heterogeneity in your interventions, of which we have in something like SFL. Range of different ways of implementing, that pedagogy. You can't really, pool it all into a single effect size for statistical analysis. So what you do is you can group studies, or you can extract the statistical information and put a narrative around each study, and then put an overall narrative around that statistical information, and observations about quality as well. So quality criteria, and this can get you pretty close to a kind of objective evaluation of what the research reports, right? And then SSR, just some background, it was formed, for kind of social sciences, answers what works for whom in what circumstances. It's not just purely numbers, it's got nuance to it. For bringing together evidence in a way that tells a convincing story of why something needs to be done, needs to be stopped, or if we have no idea why a long-established policy or practice makes a positive difference, right? And so that really, we thought, okay, well that's the one for us. Let's have a look then at this very impactful approach in K-12. We actually, for this first study, just looked at K-10, right? And that's because in the Australian system, K-10, K-12, and others, there's a bit of a break there, so we kept it to K-10. Okay, so we just had some simple RQs, right? And what is the published evidence on improving reading outcomes when you take this into classrooms, and the same for writing outcomes. So fairly simple. We grabbed all the studies we could in the context we focused on, elementary school and lower sec, I guess you called it internationally. UK, USA, New Zealand, Canada. Okay, now you can get the study there, the QR code, if you're interested. I can't give you all the details, here, I'm afraid. It was a standard systematic review, right? So we just some of you in the room have done this kind of work before. You just come up with your search terms to try to capture as many possible papers related to what you're looking at, and you do that through all the databases you think are relevant. Really, you don't want to miss a study. You want to grab all the studies out there, and find what the data is, what is the evidence. You do some screening in these, so you have criteria. We just followed the criteria basically from the What Works clearinghouse. You look at the abstracts, thousands of abstracts we had to look at, and you just say, yes, this is the kind of study that is aligned with the protocols that we need for evaluating evidence in this way, or no, or maybe just means let's read the whole thing just to be sure that it's either a yes or a no. So those protocols, as I explained before, experimental, quasi-experimental, needed a control group, right? We were interested in English language outcomes in this study, so certainly that could be extended. We didn't look at second language in this. We were just looking at that K-10, K-12 space in the countries we were focused on. So that's an area for future research, right? I mean, like Indonesia has a huge presence in Indonesia, and that would be really interesting. And we looked for 30 years. We went back 30 years, and any reading and writing outcome, we didn't get, like, absolutely anything it could have been. So we left that door, wide open. In addition, following standard protocols. You can't just look at numbers. You have to look at the quality of the study, and this derives from Gersten, and which underpin WWC guidelines, and we adapted it from Arbeli and Rice also. So you have to ask these kind of questions. You've got your study, you've got your data, you say your numerical data, but you still need to look closely and ask questions like, okay, was there baseline equivalence? What was the intervention? Do we actually know what happened in that intervention? You need to know what, if you're looking for mechanism of action, that data needs to be there. Fidelity. So fidelity means it's challenging fidelity, but you need a description of fidelity. Was fidelity maintained? So if a SFL researcher said, "Can you do this? This is reading to learn. This is the exit of pedagogy," and the teacher goes into the classroom and implements it with poor fidelity, then it's no real test of these pedagogies, right? Yes, so that matters as well. So you need information on this kind of thing, and then just others which are, I won't read them all, but they're pretty straightforward. Well, one actually very important one here is that, and people argue over this, and I've got pushback, over it too. I don't know why personally it's not my it's not my idea, but when you're evaluating, pedagogies and their effect, you can't just use closely aligned measures, right? So if you design an intervention and you design, say a summative assessment task, and that captures, it's closely aligned to capture features of your intervention. Typically, it's going to show that if they're taught something, they'll be able to perform better on some closely aligned measure. But the real game isn't to show that vocabulary improves on some kind of generalized standardized measure, or writing improves generally, or reading comprehension improves generally. So really the true test is those knock-on standardized, kind of distal measures, we call them in the jingo. Okay, Prisma flowchart. This doesn't mean much. It just means you get all your records and you screen, and then in the end, you find the ones that meet the criteria for a systematic review, and we found 8 out of what's been published in the past 30 years. So it's not a lot, really, considering the amount of work that has been published and the amount of work that is framed as classroom relevant, and maybe it is classroom relevant, but I guess I can rephrase that as a lot of work that's classroom focused with SFLGT. But in terms of evaluating, only about 8 of those seem to exist. So 3 and 4 on the list here. These are the references, and you can see these in detail in the article. Really great attempts. The 3 and 4 or 5 are journal articles. 3 and 4 are part of the same project, so there's actually fewer than 8 interventions. And not a wide, not a wide group of researchers, and it seems to be people mostly testing the pedagogies they have designed and are involved in. There's no other groups doing it, disinterested groups, for instance, which can really add in some other areas of the social sciences or the hard sciences or cognitive psychology. It's, if an independent group replicates, then great. Okay, so only 6 interventions. How am I doing for time? Not bad. 3 took place in Australia, 3 in the UK. All right, that kind of reflects, the influence in the school system of the theory. Yeah, as I said, Deb's team were the UK ones, and I've already said that point there. All the Australian ones seem to be the reading to learn. Okay, so we'll focus on we'll focus on one. No, we won't actually. I changed this. So instead of focusing on one of the weaker ones that had raised a lot of questions. I mean, maybe that's a bit unfair. So let's look at the strongest one. Okay, we don't want a straw person. People. Let's steal strong man. I don't know what the opposite to strong man is, but let's look at the absolute best one anyway. And this is a fantastic study. This was Deborah Myhill and her colleagues, great researchers, right? So you have to read this if you've not already. Very high quality randomized control trial, right? They're just beautifully designed, conducted across 32 schools in the UK. The idea was to test the effect of functional grammar using the Exeter pedagogy on writing outcomes. Yes. They designed units, 3 units that were tied to text, details of the intervention there, right? We don't need to kind of go through them and memorize them. And a few different genres were at play too: narrative, poetry, and argumentative, persuasive. Okay, there were, what else is in this screenshot I've got here? Yeah, a lot of students. So that's important. The intervention spanned a year, so that's really nice. Longer interventions better than shorter interventions. And there were distal measures there too, right? So the rubric was the KS3 mark scheme. So kind of everything you want really in an RCT. Yeah. Okay, so that's great. The measured outcome, writing rubrics aligned with the national curriculum. Yeah, I've said that all. External examiners, right? The research team didn't mark these in case, in case there was some kind of bias, unconscious bias. They got an external team to do that. That's fantastic. So the overall effect of this intervention, this SFL genre theory intervention, was small, very, very small. So the R squared is 0.09, and adjusted R squared is an effect size 0.08. So that's pretty small on writing outcomes. But then when we look at the interactions between, you run your statistical model and you look at your interactions, ability outcome, really the effect was negligible for all students except the higher ability students. So if you were, if you were pretty good in your class at writing and higher language proficiency, you benefited slightly from from this intervention. Okay, so does that mean then that SFL GT approaches or the Exeter realization of that is only good for higher ability writers? We don't know. Deb did run a follow-up study a few years later, but it didn't. I don't think that had a proper control group or something. I can't quite remember, but yeah. So okay. Yeah, well, quality indicators here, all very high. Like, I mean, it was an excellently designed study, so you can't really flaw it there at all. And many of the others, they had some problems that really undermined any conclusions there. But this study, no. But yet, there's not much going on there in terms of evidence. A small positive effect for year 8 students only, and only if they were high performing. And that seems to be about it. That seems to be about it. Not just this study, I mean, kind of across the board, right? Yeah. Okay. And there was one flaw in this, which Myhill herself noted. And I mean, it's a tricky one for researchers, right? It's that the materials were designed by the research team. And the research team are just brilliant, scholars, right? They fantastic. So there was the scalability issue. Can teachers design these materials? Can teachers deliver these kind of activities and lesson plans by themselves. Yeah. Okay. So the whole overall of the studies that have been done in 30 years, that the evidence wasn't clear or persuasive. Just against standard metrics. I'm not arguing my personal opinion or us as a research group. Just when you measure it against those protocols, it's this is a disinterested kind of synopsis of the outcome of that. So all right, yeah, a pretty small pool, but I have to say a lot of students have been involved over these years. So some of the ones in Australia were really huge, like at least 5,000 students. I would estimate have been involved, and every year except for grade 9. So that's pretty good. So it kind of has been studied well in that sense. Um, yeah, the UK study is generally a bit better. And I think I've covered that already. Okay, so yeah, okay, so that got us thinking, a little bit later about SFL's uptake in a wider literacy paradigm that also came out of Australia, with colleagues also from the States, and this is the very famous multiliteracies approach. And multiliteracies, the New London group kind of wrote that manifesto in 1996, arguing, okay, we're going to take SFL as our foundational language model, genre theory in there too, but mostly SFL. And we're going to use that, but we're going to build something bigger, and that multiliteracy certainly extends well beyond. But nonetheless, these are related, and it got us wondering. Well, we didn't find anything there, so how come we didn't find any studies related to multiliteracies in our pool of data? So anyway, just to refocus here. So multiliteracies, I think you probably know in the room, extends beyond traditional reading and writing, and a big focus on multimodal communication, all very important, right? Led to a shift in classrooms towards multimodal, and you see obviously a lot of the Hallidayan language semiotics and this in there. Explicit teaching, functions of semiotic systems, SFL meta language, which is adapted. So there were attempts to create something called a transpositional grammar, which I think I've got a slide on in a moment. Grammars of multimodal text. So really kind of interesting work to help the kids understand a range of different texts that they need to engage with and comprehend and produce, of course. Yeah. It's pretty broad. I find it pretty broad as a pedagogy. But you can read the foundational text and text after it, and it gives you a lot of suggestions. Oh, do this in your classroom, do that in the classroom. Here's just one example. Transpositional grammar was developed by Clarence and Cope over the years, and again, the foundation of this is SFL, and it's a kind of grammar. I presume it's a metaphorical grammar that is intended to be able to represent all of the meanings across modalities, and then when you feed this back to the students to help them deconstruct text, understand text, these kind of things. At least that's my understanding of what this is, and I could be wrong. I'm not an expert in transpositional grammar. Okay, so all right, the evidence base for this this multiliteracies, which is also I mean there's probably no more famous literacy article than that 1996 pedagogy and multiliteracies article, right? And SFL's right at the core. Okay, what is the evidence for this? It didn't turn up in our first review, so we had a look at the literature, and we were seeing things out there like claims about enormous literature on the application and testing over the past 30 years. And then you can, that second point there, the effects and outcomes, reporting mostly favorable effects. So yeah, as I said, we thought, well, we better take a closer look at that. Maybe, you know, uh, maybe we missed something here. And, SFL taken up in this framework has really been shown to, do a lot of, have a lot of positive literacy outcomes. So anyway, we published this a couple of weeks ago in Review of Education. If you're interested, the QR code is there, and this is kind of the secondary paper there. Same deal, my friends. It's a systematic review. We just use different keywords and all of this kind of thing to try to capture 30 years of research on this. And our result here was quite striking. So we encountered what they call in other fields. It's pretty rare in education, actually. An empty review, an empty systematic review. And so an empty systematic review is when you can find no studies that meet the protocols that you set in terms of your search parameters, which are interventions with controls, basically. And these can happen when you've got a new field. Maybe something is too new and there's not enough studies, and therefore in medicine or economics or whatever, it's just not ready for a systematic review, and you'll get these empty reviews. But when something's been around and so impactful for 30, 40 years, you have to step back and think. And these usually mean that, something's been missing, so there's an explanation for this. There's a gap and an opportunity also. So we couldn't synthesize an evidence base from these research designs to support conclusions about testing and positive impacts on any. We looked for any, not just reading and writing this time. We were happy to look at any literacy outcome. So nothing that had pre-test, post-test gains measured against control groups in those experimental or quasi-experimental designs with standardized measures, mind you. Okay, so yeah. Well, at the current, I mean, it's not to say there's no evidence for it. I mean, it's just to say that we don't have evidence with measurable outcomes, and none of those would be considered submissible for protocol evaluation when communicating to teachers about effective pedagogies. Okay. All right, so how can we do this? It might be a bit, disappointing to hear, and it's confronting, but it's certainly not an attack or anything. This is really just, I think it's kind of our job, right? Dispassionate reflection on research. I think that's what academia is supposed to be about. So, what does all this mean? How do we enhance the evidence? Our work got a response from the first paper. Anyway, 8 scholars in SFL, and they were they're great scholars, very important people, and they had a significant impact, particularly in Australia, but elsewhere around the world, getting SFLGT so widely uh, accepted into the system. They said that it also involves 30 other international educational linguists or something. Right, and they said in their article, amongst many other things, I encourage you to read it, and maybe you'll agree with them, much more than you agree with me, maybe. But they said, well, look, our view is that you're being a bit silly, Clarence. But it works. It works. It just can't be reduced to quantitative outcomes. And the insistence on experimental, quasi-experimental research with RCTs as the sole gold standard demonstrates a lack of understanding of the nature of research, And then this is many other comments besides, and you should see the comments below my social media feeds when I publish these papers. So they're much. This is pretty mild. Yeah, and okay. So what do I say about this? I think I probably understand research pretty well, so I'll put that aside. But I think we do definitely agree that interventions against control classes are not the only type of evidence, right? Like, I mean, we've consistently said that, and you'd have to be a very dishonest researcher to say, uh, you know, social approaches to education or philosophical approaches or different theories have no place. It's all cog sci, it's all numbers and experimental designs. I mean, of course it's not. It's a very rich field, education research. We need it all. So no argument from us there. We don't agree though that there's anything about SFL or GT or multiliteracies that's uniquely unmeasurable. So I got a comment recently that, well, basically, as we reject your reality, we have epistemological misunderstandings. We come from a tradition where we don't believe that literacy outcomes can be measured. And okay, okay, I think that's unusual. So how do we enhance, which is the topic? I'd suggest the policy reform is increasingly relying on intervention studies with measured outcomes. Doesn't mean qualitative and other type of research doesn't matter either. But these are the facts, and we need these kind of studies, right? We certainly need to uh, to do better research in a lot of ways. So more K-12 classroom intervention research, I would argue, is needed to strengthen SFL and GT. No, I mean, and again, remember, this is SFL, and genre theory is such a big framework. It's a linguistic theory, and I'm only talking here about, can we actually apply it to the classroom? I mean, not most linguistic theories would say no for their own linguistic theory, right? But in this one, the argument is yes. So, okay, in that space, then, we do need to tackle the question of evidence, and we need to be forthright and honest and critical about what that evidence is to teachers and others. Now, so the movement towards reevaluating what evidence is taken into account when constructing policy, and when in teacher training programs is changing. It's influenced by these global trends. So to be like a little bit kind of maybe provocative here, if there is this claim that, look, we reject intervention research against control groups and experiments, and numbers and literacy can't be reduced to numbers, because of some philosophy or epistemology that you don't understand. I think that's going to be a tough sell in the years to come. So I don't think that's. I mean, it will be fine within the community. I suppose people are going to accept that, but it might be harder to communicate, outside the field after a while, if different research methods are not embraced a bit more widely. So yeah, I guess that's really what the point is here. So I mean, but it's this overall, really, what we're just talking about is that there is an opportunity here to do these kind of studies, and certainly thousands of them have been done across many different parts of the world. So and what would they show? Well, maybe great things. I don't know. A big takeaway here is none of this work that we're talking about now has disproven anything. It hasn't proven either, though, but it hasn't disproven the value of SFLGT in raising student literacy outcomes. So okay, it's just that the evidence is not there either way. It's not unreasonable to run these kind of pedagogical trials, so we might want to do more of them. Yeah, and is the message not to use SFLGT? No, right? That's not the message. I mean, we're currently unsure about whether it works or doesn't work. So okay, I mean, it seems like a conceptually solid model, and then there's it's well thought out why it would work, right? Absolutely, but that doesn't mean it does work. And then that's why we have these multiple research designs. There's other ways to approach writing out there around the world too, and reading and this kind of thing, right? Okay, so maybe it has absolutely excellent outcomes for students. A study will be run that against intervention groups, and voila, there will be just fantastic outcomes, and that would be really great. It would help students, whatever, write better, read better, and fantastic. Let's hope that future research produces that evidence. On the other hand, as researchers, we have to be realistic that our goal is not to promote things we're invested in. Our goal is to do research for the greater good that we're somewhat disinterested in. We're trying to test theories. We're trying to conduct research that gives teachers the best information about how to whatever, I'm rambling a bit. So it's also important to do these studies because they could show no effect, right? We don't know that. They could just not work, right? To be honest. And there's also the possibility that they have negative effects. I mean, there have been cases in the history of literacy where things that make a lot of sense actually have negative effects on student reading outcomes. It could be for any kind of reason, instruction time commitment, priority adjustment, whatever. I really shouldn't be guessing, but these three things are all plausible outcomes, and that's why we need to enhance the evidence for this. Okay, so and my final sentence here: SFLGT's rich approach to language has made many contributions in K-12. Fantastic scholars have put immense effort into it, brilliant people. I'm only interested in here on K-12 applications, and I don't want to detract from anybody's achievement or the framework. There's the papers again. I think my conclusion states our overall position fairly well too. Conclusion to the first paper we wrote there. Large-scale interventions and RCTs require significant commitments from many in the education community, including schools, funding agencies, universities, and researchers, right? It's hard to get these grants. It's hard to get access. It's not simple. So to do these kind of studies, it's not all on us. We need the support. We need wider support. We need people on board, the grant agencies on board. We need messaging to schools. Maybe there has to be, the kind of more acceptance of these kind of trials in schools. We need cultural changes so that happens. It's certainly not all on us. We need help. Yeah. So in this kind of context, it is very reasonable to make trade-offs in research design with resource limitations and to provide the educational community as much information as possible, what we believe in, what we believe our data shows, yeah. And those involved in the projects should be commended for their contributions, their valuable attempts to provide information on these GTSFL approaches. However, as I said, unfortunately, the news is that the evidence of positive impacts is not overly strong, and this is something that can be discussed further and maybe presents opportunities for different kinds of research to enhance the evidence. So thank you very much, everybody. That's me, c'est moi.
Thank you so much, Clarence.
Hmm.
So now the floor is open for questions, comments, and thoughts. So I'll repeat the message right here in the chat room. So feel free to type in the chat room or turn on your mics, your cameras to engage. So feel free to, we've got a few minutes for questions and thoughts. So anybody would like to start with?
Can I start?
Yes, Peter, please.
Peter Micken speaking. First of all, thanks, Clarence. One of the things that we do know about education here in Australia, that decisions at the national level are being made on evidence-based research. So increasingly the kind of case that you've put forward is something that's demanded. Yeah. Even though many things, for example, the teaching of phonics is not evidence-based and doesn't have the kind of parameters that you've described. What's problematic in this is that some of the assumptions about children's development of literacy are wrong. If we just take the concept of the entry level of children to school, it's vastly different. That's an issue that impacts on any literacy study. And the testing that we're doing with young children when they come into school, depending on whether it's their first year or before, here in South Australia, it's on their first year, we know that it is a test that has actually no validity at all because the children have got such vastly different experiences, and the measures for taking account of that are too narrow. The second thing is, and you've pointed that out, and that's really important, is that to be able to trace somebody's literacy development from K to 12 is in education not typical. We do have the wonderful studies in Perth of children's development into adulthood. Those are really fine studies, but we don't have those kind of studies. And in a way, in order to see the impact of some educational decisions at an earlier stage will only be evident in year 12 or beyond. I'll say no more.
No.
It is a very interesting debate.
And no, thank you for sharing, Peter. Some of these, you'll get these natural experiments, won't you, after a while? Policy changes a particular aspect, a particular early screening, and then you have to wait 10 years, 12 years to see the impact of that policy change longitudinally. But, yeah. Thank you.
It does, what the message really is, that what is successful in SFL is not necessarily measured at present. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Peter. We've got a comment from Daniel. So I'll read this out for you, or you would like to read out, or maybe I can do it.
I can't see the comments, sorry.
Okay, just let me read it out for you. As much as many might not like to hear this message, this is Daniel, Clarence is actively engaging with the SFL community here, and these are some fair points for the community to consider if we wish to ensure SFL continues to have impact, particularly in policy and within wider educational institutions and so on, where people value and legitimate research and evidence in ways that may or do not align with our own. I've faced this many times in many different institutions where my approaches informed by SFL are simply dismissed. So I made this comment in an attempt to be constructive here. Okay, so this is Daniel's comment. So Clarence, anything to add?
Yeah. I think that there's there's a lot in your comment here, Daniel, but I think none of this says that SFL it shouldn't be taught or doesn't, potentially have impact. It's just really saying, here my view is that the times are changing. I'm sure we can all feel it, right? In the way, as Peter just said, like the policy landscape, how educational research is being evaluated. So this message, might not resonate with people very, very invested in it, but the opportunity is, all that has to be done are some of these studies, and potentially, fingers crossed, that evidence is there, and then fantastic. I think that's really the positive takeaway of this work that we've been doing.
Okay.
Yeah.
So in the chat room, we also had a couple of comments from David. So I might read this out for you, or maybe we could ask David to add on it. So screening criteria exclude action research projects like RTL. And then the second comment refers to like strawman dismissal of a position. So wonder if David is here, who would like to, respond or expand on your comments. We have a few minutes. Yeah.
Look, I'd have to, pardon me, I'd have to look at the dismissal of Reading to Learn in Clarence's paper to really know what I'm talking about. But it's interesting that it was totally dismissed as poor methodology. And perhaps Clarence could briefly summarise why it's dismissed.
Certainly, Professor Rose. It's it is disappointing to see that in a chat room. I have to say, but nonetheless, from memory, it was just things like the measures in the study, the way that data was interpreted. I believe you leaned into so one of your papers based mostly the claims to positive effects on qualitative interviews with teachers, but the statistical data, didn't show that. And in some cases, it showed negative effects. The control group issue was a problem from memory. I don't think there was a real control group. And you highlight all of these things in your work, Professor Rose, which is admirable, that, the control wasn't a real control group, and that could have been a problem. So it's not like that it wasn't a really impressive attempt to evaluate Reading to Learn. I mean, amazing the number of teachers you had involved in that study. But, at least my critical look at it, according to these protocols, was that it's not a straw man dismissal. It just didn't hit those marks that could be used to, to meet those evidence-based benchmarks in What Works Clearinghouse or EEF.
Oh, I'm sorry, Clarence. The straw man dismissal comment was in relation to a particular evaluation of people's responses to your work in terms of whether they accept a paradigm of control group studies. But
yeah, well, David, I mean, and it's great that you've done those. I mean, you're one of the few that actually, I mean, amazing. You're one of the few that really did some major work there. But I'm getting like ridiculous things on social media, like just strange comments about how the gold standard is written in the. I mean, I won't even repeat it. It's just so silly and ridiculous stuff. So I do admire that what you did there, Professor Rose.
And our methodology just doesn't fit with that that universalist gold standard control group, psychologically grounded evaluations. It's a large-scale teacher action research project measuring growth by the teachers as they're implementing the program, using text analysis techniques that they've been taught that are based on SFL language models, measuring results for top, middle, and bottom cohorts in the class so that we can see differences in those groups. All kinds of things that we consider to be important because the aim of it is actually targeted at the bottom end of the class, not the top end of the class, but all of which don't fit within the protocols that you've set up. So all of that gets left out of your
So I'm receptive to what you're saying there. I'd not go down the same path entirely and say it. First of all, these kind of studies should not be all educational research, right? But we do need them. Now, can they capture diversity? They can, right? They can capture variability in performance. So, I mean, sometimes these experimental designs can get a bit caricatured, unfortunately, but there's robust methods, blocking, matching, there's statistical methods that can capture some of that, who it worked for and who it didn't, like in Deb's study, I suppose I showed you there. But like, like you said, David, you did something different. Your intervention is different. And that doesn't necessarily make it bad or useless or anything like that. It just means that it's not aligned with the protocols that are used in these systematic reviews, and so it wouldn't be, let's say it was submitted to one of these educational evaluation bodies, reviewed by somebody not me, they would say, sorry, here's our criteria, we can make a recommendation that this is effective pedagogy based on that research design. Yeah.
So I think you need to spread it out and look at these different approaches from a broader social perspective, because what's the goals of the bodies that you're talking about? What are the endpoints in terms of interventions in educational institutions? What are the benefits for the various interested parties, whether it's universities or the international education publishing industry versus, let's say, for example, the intensive training of teachers in pedagogic and linguistic knowledge so that they can improve the outcomes of their students. So we really need to zoom out and evaluate the evaluations on those larger social political criteria. And I think that your kinds of approach, they're perfectly valid, but they need to be seen in that wider context in terms of what their wider social function is in the broad educational system. And we also need to think about it in terms of the international politics and economic system that's underpins all this. And we need to ask how effective is that evaluation methodology in terms of improving literacy outcomes in the country in which it originates, the United States?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of complex issues and political issues, David, that's for sure. So, you write a paper like what I've been writing, and for some reason I'm getting called like neoliberal right wing and just this kind of nonsense.
Well, don't characterize what I said in those terms.
No, I'm not. But like I said, this is what I am finding on social media. So I wish we could disambiguate some of it. I get is my point in response to that, because all of that matters, David, absolutely. But we can still just do a control trial against groups. It doesn't have to be huge. It could be simple, a few classes, a bit of randomization. We measure outcomes, and maybe we could, to some extent, put all of those, really highly charged, political kind of battles aside.
I don't think they're highly charged. I think they're actually the criteria on the basis of which you need to evaluate different kinds of evaluations and different kinds of interventions. Who ultimately benefits?
Okay. Well, thank you for that input. Yeah.
Thank you, David. So perhaps I'll wrap up the discussion with a couple of comments from the chat room. So while we are from Margot, so while we are considering whether it is actually comparing apples to oranges, the comments from Ruth was that Steve Graham's meta-analysis work points to the positive effects of the use of models in writing instruction, which is something that we have long advocated in genre-based approaches. So Graham may not have identified the positive effect by looking at RCTs informed by SFL, but that does not delegitimize the general point. So the second point would be a question which can be applied to studies which indicate that grammar interventions do not improve writing results, is to ask whether the teaching of grammar cause damage. So it's largely thirdly, that grammar instruction reduces literacy outcomes by displacing other worthwhile instruction, like a third year student in New Zealand in the 70s note that no appreciable improvements were made by any group, whether they spent one class a week on grammar or on reading and writing. So Myhill's RCT can be framed as showing that there was no damage from teaching grammar, but this may not be enough to satisfy many, and I'd like to claim that Ruth likes to claim that it does more than that, but it's only been since the 1960s that people thought that maybe knowledge about a language was indispensable. Okay.
Yeah, I think some very good points. Yeah.
Thank you so much. So Vin, would you like to take over? I think this is about time to close the conference. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thanks so much, Clarence, for being here with us today and for your thought-provoking presentation. It's really great to see two papers published in the Australian Journal of Language and Literacy, and we are very pleased to write a spy for the authors of the two articles to continue the healthy conversation in the oral mode in this forum. So thanks so much to David and Ruth and everyone for your comments, and we look forward to what come next in the future. And thanks so much.